can you? Miss Wilma. This morning I want to go back to John chapter 6. We will be in John chapter 6 for, I don't know, we'll probably break for Thanksgiving and Christmas and then maybe be in it most of 2021. Hey Casey, go over there to that first slide and drop it down a little bit where I'm not so loud. But John chapter 6, we've built this whole year to get to this point, to get to the great and wonderful theology in John chapter 6, where Jesus is revealing throughout the Gospel of John, but especially in these chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6, he is tying all these things together to reveal to us his identity, his ministry, and his mission. And he is wanting us to know these things so that we will not misrepresent him in our own mind and by our own expectation or by our own definition of who the Messiah should be, who Christ should be, or what God should do, that we by our own definition would miss him. He is wanting to reveal to us and then to establish in permanence within our mind who he is by his own definition. What his ministry is as he is following the will of God and what his mission is to accomplish. The spiritual and eternal over the physical and the temporal. Now I never know whenever we don't meet together, and with those being sick, a couple of weeks ago we took a couple of weeks off just for safety reasons. But I never know who actually watches the sermons on Facebook and YouTube and on the website, and I'm always concerned about that because I can't just see your faces and see if you're getting it, see if I'm spending too much time or not enough time on some of the things that we're dealing with. And so I want to give just a moment or two of review this morning. The biggest problem for man, from Adam to Bill, the biggest problem that man has faced from the very beginning in our relationship with God is to know what God actually says about himself in the Scriptures, rather than what we assume he says. The actual truth of the Scriptures, rather than the assumption or the desire of man in our dealings with God, in our understanding of God, and then in our following after him as the children of God or the disciples of Christ. And it is a battle that we must face and we must fight, and ultimately we must find victory through his grace. It is a battle that we must face all the time. From the beginning of our salvation until the time when our race is done and he crowns us with that crown that he has prepared for us. The battle to know him, to grow in grace and knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ, rather than to simply fall back on the conventional thought of men or the assumption of our own mind. To know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his suffering, Paul says in Philippians 3, is the great prize of Christianity. In this gospel, in chapter 17, 1 through 3, Jesus defines eternal life as knowing God. And it is a lifelong journey. And along this journey, it is a lifelong struggle to truly know him, to let him define himself. Now looking at verses 14 and 15, and then verse number 26 of John 6. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This indeed is the prophet who is coming to the world." Perceiving that they were about to come and take him by force and make him king, Jesus withdrew to the mountain by himself. And then verse number 26. Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, truly, truly, I say to you, you are seeking me not because you saw the signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves." Why I wanted to take these verses out of order, dealing with the feeding of the 5,000 3 weeks ago, and then dealing with, or 2 weeks ago, and then dealing with Jesus walking on the water last week, and now jumping back 2 verses. Why I wanted to take these verses out of order and cover what we did last week is because we must know, and we must believe, and we must get that the world cannot harm us. It can only kill us. That was the sermon last week. The world cannot harm us. It can only kill us. That's why Jesus says, "Do not fear men who can kill you. I would tell you who to fear. Fear him, who not only has the power over your life, but can cast your soul into hell." But once we fear him, in Luke 7, that great passage, do not fear, because you are of much more value than many birds, many sparrows. But you see, there's a lot of people who falter in their Christianity because they just don't get this. Yeah, they may believe that Jesus says, "In this world you will have trouble," but when trouble comes along, they think that Jesus should wipe it away, that Jesus should remove every hurdle, that every difficulty in life should simply be magically, miraculously gone from their lives because they are Christians, even though he tells us to expect trouble in this world. And so we must know, we must believe, and we must get that the world, it cannot harm us. It can only kill us, but it will try. And what we saw last week in the walking on the water, what I thought the greatest miracle of that passage is that Jesus knew exactly where they were. Yeah, there's the walking on the water. Not discounting that miracle at all, right? But the fact that they are on a dark sea at night during a great storm, and Jesus knows exactly where they are, is incredibly comforting to me. Because he knows. He knows what we are going through. He knows what we are dealing with. He knows exactly what we need for whatever we may be encountering. It's kind of ironic that in the course of this disease that I now have this headache that is always there, because when Vicki and I first got married, she would have migraines. And I couldn't understand why she didn't want to go to the movies or go out to eat or, go play softball when she had a headache. Because to me, a headache was, I could still play basketball, with cymbals. It's kind of hard to play basketball with cymbals, but you know what I mean. How I defined a headache was nothing how she defined a headache. And no matter how hard she tried, she could not, completely define what she was going through to me, because I wasn't experiencing it. But what we know in Christ is that he knows. He knows where we are, He knows what we are dealing with, and He knows exactly what we are experiencing. He says to Paul on the road to Damascus, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? When we are hungry, He is hungry. When we are cold, He is cold. When we are lonely, He is lonely. Matthew chapter 25. It is a wonderful, comforting thing to know that He knows. Now look at these verses as we finish our review when we come to today. When the people saw the sign that He had done, they said, this indeed is the prophet who's come into the world. They've yet to fully realize who He is, even though in chapter 5 He says over and over again, I am equal to God. I am God. I am the one who has come to fulfill His purposes, to reveal His identity, and to make sacrifice to make you acceptable before God. And yet they still only see Him as the prophet who has come into the world, and they want to make Him king. The irony here is they want to make the King of Kings king. They want to force Him to be king. Listen, our job is not to make Him king. Our job is to recognize that He is the king, and then to respond to that reality. He is the king of all creation. He is the king of all activities within creation. And He is the king of time. He is the king of purpose. He is the king of will. He is the king of kings. But they want to make Him king because He made them breakfast or made them lunch. And He fed them. And they wanted a king to deal with all of their physical problems, to deal with their hunger, and then all the way through to their occupation by the Romans. They were only thinking in time, and they were only thinking physically. And what Jesus is doing in this whole chapter is He is telling us that we must train ourselves. We must teach ourselves. We must see in the Scriptures so that it becomes real to us that we are to look away from the material and the temporal and look to the eternal and the spiritual. And if we don't do that, we will never truly know the wonders of His reign. He is the King of Kings. And for us to know the wonders of His reign and the great blessings of His reign as King, we must train ourselves to look beyond the temporary and the physical and look to the eternal and the spiritual. Because this is what He has come to do. This is what He has come to accomplish. I thought we would take this week as an interlude, as an introduction to His kingship and His kingdom, that we would look at Psalm 46. And why is twofold, because I think it truly gives us an insight into John 6, especially as he goes forward into the spiritual feeding that He has come to do, that you eat my flesh and drink my blood. It gives us insight, number one. But secondly, it is an incredibly calming, settling psalm. When my soul begins to fret, when my mind begins to worry, in my life when I begin to panic, this is the place that I generally turn to find that settled peace, to find that calm. That my mind might not race into areas that it should not, but that it can become singly and singularly focused on God. Psalm 46. What a wonderful psalm. To the choir master, the sons of Korah, according to the Alma, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the midst of the sea, though the waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at the swelling. Selah. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, a holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage. The kingdoms totter. He utters his voice and the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah. Come, behold the works of God, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah. Father, I pray very simply this morning that you bring us the peace and the calm that you intend, so that by that settled peace, we might see you in your beauty, in your wonder, in your compassion, and in your power. And that nothing is beyond the reach of your everlasting arms. And you are a fortress through which nothing can break through to destroy us. Let us rejoice in that. Let us worship you for that. And by that peace, love you all the more and take your love to those whose lives are wrought with worry and anxiety, and they don't know where to turn. Father, as always, help me with this passage, with its proclamation. In Christ's name. Amen. I could probably end the sermon here. God is our fortress. God is our refuge. We talked about last week the world cannot harm us. It can only kill us. You know why? Because God is our fortress. What can separate us from the love of God? None of those 19 things that are mentioned in Romans chapter number 8. Not things past, not things present, nor things to come. Nothing can separate us from God. He is our fortress. He not only is our fortress, he's our refuge. When it seems like we've come to the end of our rope, when it seems like we've come to the end of our strength, when it seems like we've come to the end of our joy, when it seems like we've come to the end of our hope, when it seems like we've come to the end of our self-control, when it seems like we've come to the end of anything, he is there to not only be our fortress to protect us, but to be our refuge, where we might find restoration in those things. As David said, restore unto me the joy of my salvation. As Jesus says to the disciples whenever they are worrying and fretting on the ocean, peace give I unto you, my peace give I unto you. When he tells them he is going to leave, he gives them his spirit, and then says, joy I give to you, my joy I give to you. He's not only is our fortress, he is our refuge. God is our refuge refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Again, I don't want to beat this dead horse, but I know this horse is not dead. It tramples over a lot of people's faith. I told you in the last couple of years, I've talked to so many people who at one time attended here. And so many of them no longer attend and no longer are in active worship of God because trouble came into their lives and God did not do what they thought God should do, and therefore they lost their confidence in God. They lost their focus on God, and the whole of their focus was on their trouble rather than seeing the grace that He was extending to them in their times. I want you to understand something and to get it and to believe it. Again, beating this horse. In this world, you will have trouble. It will affect all of us, any of us, every one of us, at any point in time. But understand something. In this trouble, God is our refuge. God is our strength. He may not take away a disease. He may not take away the ravages of time. He may not take away cancer. He may not take away that cancerous person in your life. But He will be a place to which we can go to know that we are safe. And He will be a place that we can go to find our soul restored, to find our strength restored. He is our refuge and our strength. In a very real way, Psalm 46 is the opposite of Psalm 23. In Psalm 23, you have the restoration of the body. Beside still waters into green pastures, He restores my soul so that we can walk in the paths of righteousness, even into the valley of the shadow of death. He restores our body and soul so that we can walk into trouble with purpose, knowing that He is with us. That's Psalm 23. Knowing that He is with us, His rod and His staff comfort us, knowing that our destination is sure. Psalm 46 is the other side of that coin. When we are in the midst of trouble, He is a place to which we can rest, knowing that we are safe, knowing that we can take refuge there, that we can be refreshed, that we can find strength. You see that in Psalm 26, Psalm 20, that famous Psalm of David. Thank you. In Psalm 23, we're refreshed and we're restored, and then we get up and walk in the paths of righteousness through the very valley of the shadow of death. Here in Psalm 46, we're in the midst of trouble. We're in the midst of trial. We're in the midst of difficulty. And He is there to be our refuge and our strength. And not in some vague future. A present help. Not a vague promise that may or may not happen, to certain people. He's saying, who is ever in need of that spiritual restoration, whoever is in need of that time to catch a breath, whoever is in need of refuge, turn to God. He's there. He will settle us. And He will restore us. And when the dark shadows of trouble and trial begin to overwhelm us, His very presence and His promises will dispel those shadows by His glorious light. The light of His Word, the light of His work, the light of His presence in our lives. In trouble, we have a what? Starts with an R, ends with refuge. In trouble, we have a what? In trouble, we have strength. And in trouble, we have it when? Right now. Yes, He heals some people and He doesn't heal other people. And sometimes we scratch our head as to why. There are some people that life seems to be a level walk, and for others there seems to be valleys and hills and ditches and unseen trouble all the way through it. We don't know particularly what He's going to do in the physical aspect of our lives, but spiritually, that which truly matters, that which eternally matters, God says, I am here. And not in some vague, cloudy future. I'm here, and I'm here right now to be your refuge and to be your strength. Therefore, what's the next word? We. I want to take just a moment to talk about the need of and the value of corporate worship. Therefore, we will not fear. Why is corporate worship so valuable? Because whatever valley we may be in, we can probably look around and see somebody who God has brought them out of it. Whatever difficulty that we may be facing, we can look around and probably find somebody who's been through it. And if not, we can find somebody who will come alongside us and aid us in our walk, who will strengthen us in our walk. A couple of weeks ago, I hate to always use me as an illustration, but I'm gonna. I'd just gotten the news from the doctors that the surgeries that was going to take away most of this pain was going to be pushed way off. And man, I was low that day. To say anything other would be a lie. And I got home, and there was a pineapple upside down cake on my counter. I know that Miss Wilma did not know that I had gotten that news that day. But I can't tell you how uplifting that was for me to know that I'm loved. It is a wonderful thing to the we that we have in our lives. To know that people care about us. And not just the people that bear our names. Not just the people that we are married to or our blood courses through their veins. To know that there are 160 people, that there are 70 people, that there are 90 people, there are however many people who are here, and really however many people call this place their church, that we truly are family. And together, God gives us strength, but He also gives us one another. So that we will not fear. Though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. Therefore, because we have this redoubt, this refuge, this strength, we can live without fear. If you think about it, fear almost always changes our course. We don't make the best decisions when we're afraid. I've told y'all this story again, but I'm going to tell it today. When I first got here, I was 23 years old, skinny, athletic, wearing shorts. And I was working up here late one night. And While I don't believe in ghosts, I've run from them many times. And I was in the basement of the church about 2 o'clock in the morning. And the basement of a church at night is just a spooky place. And I heard the front doors rattle. And then I heard the side door down there where my office was. I heard it open and close. And I got scared that somebody might be breaking in. Instead of hiding, I picked up a map and rolled it up, thinking I was going to fight off people with a map. When we're scared, we don't make the best decisions. In fact, when we're scared, we generally make very bad decisions. But he says, I want you to know I am your redoubt. I am your fortress. I am your refuge. I am your strength. Therefore, you can live without fear. God enables clarity of mind and of purpose so that we don't make the decisions that others make in fear. We have a peace that passes understanding. We have the knowledge of God, and we have the certainty that He is King of Kings, that He is Lord of Lords, that His purposes will always come to pass. And because of that, we can live our lives with clarity, with certainty, with a lack of panic, which keeps us from ruining our lives or ruining our testimonies or ruining our days with bad decisions. We will not fear, even if everything seems to be falling apart around us. The power of gathering, the power of example, the power of family, and the power of God. When you find yourselves beginning to panic or to worry or fret, remember, be still and know that He is God. Be still and contemplate on what He has provided us, what He gives us. The earth and the mountains cast into the midst of the sea because its waters roar and foam. You see the picture here. It's of a tsunami, of a hurricane, of the unrelenting storms that bring waves against a mountain, and the mountain begins to erode and fall into the sea. And at a tsunami or at a hurricane or at that unrelenting waves and storms of the ocean, even the mountains tremble. The mountains tremble, but we will not. How? How can this be? Because there is a river, a different kind of water, whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. Here you see the psalmist is using different imagery. One is of an unrelenting storm beating against a mountainside, and the mountain begins to erode and to fall into the sea. And then immediately he goes and he says, there's a river. There is a river that makes glad the city of God, the holy habitation of God. The river idea here, the imagery is of calming and refreshing, something that turns fear into joy. Outside, the water rages and destroys, but inside there is a calming and refreshing stream. Where? Well, where does God make His dwelling? Where is that? Ephesians 2, verse 19. So then you are no longer strangers or aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints of God and members of the household of God, built upon the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure being joined together grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him you also are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. You see the wonderful imagery that the psalmist is bringing up? This great hope of the psalmist, the ministry and mission of Christ makes true so that we become the very habitation of God. I am in him and he is in me. And though the outside world may be crumbling and falling apart, the storms are taking its toll, inside of the habitation of God, there is a calming river that makes glad the heart. I love that picture. That refuge that we have, that place that we have, a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. He's already said he's our refuge. We can run into him. We are in him and he is in us. And there is within us that which can calm us regardless of the storms that are raging, regardless of the difficulties that we face. I talked to Suzanne Womack this week. 40 years old, and she wakes up one morning during the night with a terrible headache and wants to go back to sleep. But her husband Mitchell takes her to the hospital and she has an aneurysm. And 21 days in ICU later, the doctors told her that if she would have gone back to sleep, that if Mitchell hadn't kept her awake, she would have died. The aneurysm would have raged. And I talked with her the other night for a good long time, just to kind of see where she was spiritually, to see where she was, in every way. And she said, I never worried, because I knew if it was my time, you had taught me, which made me feel good, that John 14 says he will come and get me and take me to where he is. I wasn't worried about my children because God gave me a good man. And because the promises of God, they kept me going, kept me alive. What a wonderful, wonderful testimony. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when the morning dawns. Your future, our future, my future, is more secure than the Rocky Mountains, than the Himalayas, than the Appalachians. You look back here and the mountains are cast into the sea. Look back here, the mountains are cast into the sea. They tremble at its swelling, right? They are moved, but we are not, right? Now, God is in the midst of her, and we will not be moved. It is an incredible thing to think that my future is more secure than the Rocky Mountains. That the promises that God had made in me have made me more unmovable than the mountains. In the midst of her, God is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved. God will help when the morning dawns. When does the morning dawn? I want y'all to kind of get this. When does the morning dawn? After the what? After the night, after the darkness. But it also dawns when? Every single day. God is not just with us when there is trouble. God is not just with us whenever there is great joy or great triumph in our lives. God is with us every single day. After the dark of night, yes, but also every day when we get up. He will never leave us, never forsake us. We are never without resource because God is Emmanuel, God with us. We are the most secure community on earth, the people of God. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice and the earth melts. But we shall not be moved. How awesome is that? It feels like sometimes we are tossed around by every wind of change, by the roaring waves of time and circumstance. But God says, I hold you tight. I uphold you with my own right hand. The Lord of hosts is with us. And y'all know the word host means army. The Lord of the armies is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah. Come, behold the works of God. How he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow, shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. You have so many pictures of that in the scriptures. The Egyptians, when it seemed impossible that the people of God could escape Egypt once Pharaoh had turned his anger toward the people and rallied his army, and yet God opened the sea and they walked through on dry ground. Here, this psalm is during the time when good King Hezekiah has watched the fall of the northern kingdom, and now Sennacherib's army has come and surrounded him, and he prays, and God says that they will not have the nation of Judah, but they have surrounded the city, and he doesn't know how in the world they might escape. And yet God sends an angel out, and 185,000 of Sennacherib's forces die in one night, and they retreat. Though we may not see the path in front of us or how all things might work out, we must know and believe there is a path in front of us. That God is going before us to make the way. God is behind us to protect us. God is all around us. Behold the works of God. Sometimes, and I know I've said this 1,000 times, and if I'm here another 28 years, I'll say it another 1,000 more. Sometimes the best way to see God is to look backward. In the midst of your trouble right now, remember God. Remember what he's done. Remember what he's done in the scriptures. Remember what he's done, what he has done in those lives around us. We look at Jeannie Martin. We look at different people who have had trouble in their lives and how they come through it. We look at the promises of Scripture. We look in the lives of others, and we look at the protections that we've had in our own past. And focusing on these things rather than the things that trouble us enable us to make a proper plan and a proper response to the things that are troubling us and the things that are coming against us. Now, how does all this work? How do we find that refuge? How do we find that strength? How do we make real that river of refreshment in our lives? How is sorrow turned to joy and panic turned to peace? He tells us in verse number 10, this is God speaking. Be still and know that I am God. The peace that is afforded to us in verse 1, the key to its application is found in verse number 10. In the midst of trouble, we may feel helpless against what's facing us. And we are by ourselves. But when God is with us, we shall not be moved. This feeling of helplessness causes us to worry, causes us to stress out, causes us to fret. And these emotions, if given rein, will cause us to stop, to falter, to give up. You ever been driving down the road and you see a squirrel run across the road and he almost gets to the other side to safety, and then he decides he wants to run back, and then back, and then back, and then back, and then back, and back, and you don't know what to do with your car? Sometimes we are like that. When we panic, when we worry, when we fret, when we give those things rein in our lives, we will not make the proper decision. I ask y'all so many times to pray for me in the midst of all the stuff that I deal with, that I don't lose it on Will and my lovely wife. Vicky. Sorry. Anybody got a couch I can lie on today? But I ask y'all to pray for me, that in the midst of all of that I don't let it so overwhelm my mind that I take it out on Will, or I take it out on Vicky, or I take it out on others that don't deserve it, or that I don't just turn inward and not accomplish the things that God has called me to accomplish. And that which restores me, that which gives me strength, that which gives me a stable place on which to stand, are those things that God has provided me: a refuge, a strength, a family, promises. Think on these things. Be still and know that I'm God. Don't just cross-stitch it and put it on your wall. Don't just sing songs about it. Know it deep in your heart. Worse, this feeling of helplessness can cause us to panic. And not only make bad decisions, but terrible decisions. The psalmist is speaking of the power of God to comfort his people in the midst of the greatest possible trials and difficulties, in tremendous turmoil and upheaval. When we are caught in such times and circumstances, it's easy to panic. It's easy to begin to worry, to fret, and to fear. Dazed and confused, we don't know where to go or what to do. He says, stop for a moment. Think about me. Who I am, what I have done, what I am doing, and what I will do for you. Stop running about like a frightened animal and consider that He is in control. He is telling us we have no need to panic because we have a place to flee when those things seem to overwhelm us. We have a strength provided to give us that hope that we need to carry on in His name and His purpose, walking in the paths of righteousness. The Lord of hosts is on our side. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And after you're still and after you know that who He is, worship Him. What a glorious strength is in worship. I know we've talked about it before, but again, it's a day of reminders. When Abraham is told by God that he is going to destroy the 10 cities on the plain, he says, how about if I find 50 worshipers? You can't find 50. He says, how about if I find 30? How about if I find 20? How about if I find just one worshiper in each of those towns? He got all the way down to 10. That is the power of worship. If there would have just been one worshiper of God in Sodom, one worshiper of God in Gomorrah, one worshiper of God in the other 8 cities, they would not have been destroyed. We oftentimes undervalue what it means to worship God, what it provides. And I don't know if on this side of eternity we'll ever know how much our worship has extended beyond our own person, our own church, into our community. You see it on the other end in Jericho. The people had spent 40 years mumbling, grumbling, and complaining, and God tells them to walk around Jericho 6 days in absolute silence, and what happens? Not a cotton-picking thing. But on the seventh day, when the Hallel is sounded by the horns and the people cry out Hallel, the walls of the city fall down. Jesus, on his entrance into Jerusalem, he had said that the city itself, because of their rejection of him, not one stone will be left upon another, but the people worshiping on that hill keep that from happening right away. The Pharisees come up and say, tell your people to stop. Not the Pharisees, the priests. The priests come up and say, tell your people to stop worshiping. And he said, if I were to tell them to stop, the stones would immediately cry out. And the salvation that would be allotted through this day would not come to pass. Worship is incredibly important. Be still, know that I am God, and respond to him in worship. And that will settle us. That will calm us. That will keep us. Right? Lift him up. Hold him up. Magnify him. Make much of him. We have a tendency of people to magnify trouble and minimize God. You know what we need to do? Swap those two things. There's a great preacher that died about 40 years ago, Vance Havner. And he had a sermon called Your God is Too Small. And he talked about that very thing. That we have a tendency of people to magnify trouble and to minimize God. And we need to flip that in our lives. And this is how it's done. While this is a command of God, it's not a threat. But it's a guarantee. This will work. This will steel you. This will help you. It is his way of providing comfort and a settled mind regardless of what may be surrounding us. Remember who God is. Remember what God controls. Remember what is more powerful than God and what is. Even Charles from Mississippi can answer that. What's more powerful than God? Nothing. And remember what he's promised. I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. I'll be a refuge into which you can run. I'll be a strength when yours has come to its end. I will place you in a family that will care about you. And I will be in the midst of you as a river to make glad your heart, regardless of the turmoil, the hurricane, or the tsunami that's outside. I will settle your hearts that you can properly respond to that trouble, to that difficulty. Maximize me in your heart and in your lives, and it will make all the difference. This is why Jesus says, remember me. Remember me. Remember me. Remember me. It is our greatest tool in properly navigating life. It is our greatest tool in properly living for him. It is our greatest tool to keep us from error and to lead us into triumph. Remember him. The people so missed it because they were concerned about the temporal rather than the eternal, the physical rather than the spiritual. They want to force the King of Kings to be king. That'd be like trying to force me to be good looking. Just seeing if y'all were still awake. But they were willing to trade that which is most valuable for another meal. We want to make you king to take care of all of our physical problems, whenever he provides so much more. Let us not make that same mistake. Whenever trouble, trial, difficulty comes upon you, stop for a moment and remember who he is, what he has promised, what he controls, what's more powerful than him, and what he's promised you. And then with the strength that he provides, let us stand up and be part of that we, finding someone else who may be tottering, wobbling, weaving, ready to fall, and let us run to their aid. Let us hold him up and magnify him and worship him, that in a world of darkness, light might shine. And don't worry, God is in control. I am his and he is mine.